Ben, you mentioned the practicals. Shawn, talk to us a little bit about those practicals, why you put so much time into developing them, and what your goal is for students to come out of those practicals.
Oh, like Ben said, I think a lot of times we learn about things in theory and things are presented to us, and we look at PowerPoint slides and we do CBTs and we watch YouTube videos and things like that. And I think that's all well, good, and important. But in the end, I think until you actually have your hands in meat, or you're putting a tourniquet on a person with blood spraying out of a wound, I think it just doesn't matter, because even though we know these things are fake, even though we know that this is a contrived scenario, that we're all safely in a warehouse or a classroom or wherever we happen to do the class, once you get there, your blood starts pumping. We become extremely task focused. We get the tunnel vision because it feels like a traumatic situation to our bodies. And even though our brain tells us it's not, it still feels that way. So it gets your blood pumping, it gets your heart moving. Sometimes we get some really great actors, and they even ratchet up the realism even more. But yeah, I mean, until you're actually sitting there with your knee or a hand or something on a wound, trying to put direct pressure and open your med kit and get gloves on and open gauze and get a tourniquet staged and ready, until you've actually done that, kind of under the clock, under the gun, and hands on a person, I don't think you'll ever be ready. And again, in a real situation, it's going to be even more intense. But I think that this is, a really good stepping stone to getting to that point of proficiency that a real situation might require from a person.
Awesome. You touched on wound packing, getting some wound packing done in there. Ben, talk to us about how you guys practice that. What were some of the practicals there, and if you were actually able to get your hands simulated with some blood on there.
Yeah, so the practicals we did with wound packing specifically were it's like a catheter, if you will, shoved into a huge hunk of, I don't know, pork or whatever meat it was, just a huge chunk of meat. And they had this like dyed red soap stuff, whatever, just slick as hell. And you'd have an incision and they'd start pumping and say, go. And you'd have to try to stop the bleeding from whatever injury was on this chunk of meat. And they had two different types. They had the regular, just straight up meat, looks like a giant pork shoulder or whatever. And then they had one that actually looked like a flank from a pig with skin on it and everything. And seeing the difference between, like, okay, you have a large gash, you have to try to pack it, versus a very, very small gash where you can barely get one finger in there, and then you have to try to pack from there, and you'd get covered. I mean, you'd put on gloves and just get absolutely covered in blood, if you will, this fake, soap stuff or whatever it was, and trying to open the bandages. If you tried to figure out where the bleeding was and then tried to open the bandage, it was almost impossible to get the bandage open because your gloves are just completely slick and you have no grip. So you learn, like, okay, take both hands out of them, get the bandage open, then dive back in, things like that. Little things that you would never think about in the moment. You're just like, oh my gosh, So it was really cool to see. Okay, this is a small wound. I can't even get my index finger in there. I have to use my pinky to try to pack this thing, or whatever situation may be. So it was great to see that.
Yeah, that's often people's favorite, one of their favorite parts of the class, and I think so too. It's one of my favorite parts too. It teaches us some really valuable lessons, and it took us a while to find the right meat to use, but now we do the pork shoulder roast because it has one side that we just do meat just for practice, and then we actually have the other side that has the skin and subcutaneous fat and everything going down, and then there's even a bone inside there. So we try to run the artery or whatever blood supply line that we have. We try to run that between the bone and the skin so that we can pack to the bone and actually completely occlude the blood flow in those. And I think that, it's people's favorite part for a reason. That's another thing that just gets your blood pumping and really kind of stresses you out because you're trying to stop a bleed and you're trying to stop it fast.